I'll give it another minute. So we'll go ahead and start. What do you think, Gerardo? Sylvia?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody has written to you about the Skype for Business
No,
app.
nobody has. Nobody has.
Okay. How many people were you expecting?
Well, 15 people registered.
Okay.
And
yeah. Well, we have
we have 4 attendees.
Okay.
I can.
Yeah, it's your call. No problem.
I can give it a minute or so we can start at 3 or 5, just in case anyone's having trouble connecting.
Okay.
So I think we'll go ahead and start, and if anybody joins later on, we're recording this anyhow, so it will be shared on YouTube and on CCAC Knowledge Platform. Hi everyone, my name is Aditi Ramola, and I work currently as a technical project manager at the International Solid Waste Association, which is based in Vienna. And ISWA is hosting this webinar on behalf of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition Municipal Solid Waste Initiative. And we welcome you to the webinar on the Introduction to Policy Instruments for Municipal Solid Waste Management. Today's webinar is going to be led by Gerardo Canales, who is the director for the Latin America program at the Center for Clean Air Policy, and Sylvia Aguilar, who is an environment and development coordinator at CEGESTI. So the webinar will start with a general overview about policy, regulations, and other policy instruments in SWM, and also the importance of having them in place in order to support municipalities. And it's going to provide examples also from the Costa Rican experience. The webinar is also going to provide inputs on the impact of policy and regulatory frameworks on project financing in developing countries. During the presentations, please kindly mute your microphones, and after the presentations there will be time for a question and answer session. and you can you can ask questions aloud or even type them into the dialog box, whichever you choose to do. So without further ado, I give the floor to Sylvia and Gerardo. Sylvia, you can share your screen if it's... Actually, it says that you are, but I don't see... okay, yeah. You're currently muted, perhaps?
Yes, I was muted, I'm sorry. So I'm going to share my screen right now. Let me know if you're seeing my screen, please. Can you see my screen right now?
It's loading.
Okay, well, while this
Yes,
began...
and now we can see it.
Okay, great. So, hi, my name is Sylvia Aguilar. Kind regards from Costa Rica. We are in Central America. And within the CCAP, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, we are coordinating the Central American network. So the topic that I will be speaking about, as Aditi said, is the importance of policy instruments for municipal solid waste management. As you guys know, because I mean, I'm sure most of you guys work on solid waste management, a comprehensive system includes many things, not just collecting waste and driving it to the final disposition place, which is a common misunderstanding of this issue, but it includes a lot of things. And of course, some of these things or these topics are quite popular and some are not. For example, everybody wants to see their city clean and have places to play, to take your kids and everything. That's the popular part of waste management, when people get to see the impact, if you say so. But there are some other things that are not so popular, like collecting the fees and effectively collecting the fees and having to set rules on what can and cannot be done. That is not so popular, and is something that many municipalities, or for political, social, or other reasons, are not so keen to do so. Here in the Latin America region, the average collection rate is quite high compared to the worldwide average. However, this is not so good if you see other things. For instance, the many dump sites that we have in the region, for being such a small region, we have quite many dump sites. So basically, on the solid waste management hierarchy, we are collecting and driving it to the final disposition place, but not even in an environmentally sound manner. Basically, collecting and hiding it, if you will. So we still have a lot of work to do on the other, on reinforcing or enforcing this solid waste management hierarchy. And to do so, some places, some countries, in some places, they might think that with social instruments, education, training, sensibilization, of course that is important. That is a very important thing to do, but it's not the only thing. The local governments, they need policy instruments for municipal solid waste management that support them in their work, economic instruments to encourage or disencourage specific actions and behaviors. We need regulating and monitoring instruments to manage or prohibit certain practices particularly those that have impact in the public health and in the environment. And then, of course, the other social instruments that are quite important, to inform, to interact with the citizens, to engage citizens. But that's not everything. Not by informing and raising awareness is not enough. You need the other policy instruments as well. Particularly, it is important to set the responsibility and authority of the various actors or stakeholders, including the financial responsibility. The generators, the people that actually produce the waste, whether they are houses or commerce or industry, the waste managers, those who are responsible for collecting, transporting, and the final disposal, because not in every case is the role of the municipality and not for every type of waste. The producers and the importers, and the various levels of government, and in a way to avoid contradictory and duplicate mandates, which has been the case in some countries here in our region. We also need standards or norms to regulate the management of hazardous and non-hazardous waste, the operating parameters of the waste management facilities as to protect the health and the environment, the fines and penalties in case of non-compliance, and the power and obligation to apply those economic instruments, as well as the obligation to implement social instruments. It's not a secret that in our countries, sometimes, unfortunately, we do have some laws, we might have some regulations, and if you look them up on the internet, you might say, but this country has laws, why is Sylvia saying that it's not enough? But the truth is that sometimes the enforcement of those laws is not as well, stringent is not the word, because you are supposed to comply with the law, but the truth is that it's not enforced in an appropriate manner. Sometimes it's a very nice law, and all the senators or whatever, they congratulate themselves because we have that law, but then they didn't foresee resources for the compliance of the law, or the legal possibility, or the actual possibility of the people to comply with. So it becomes one of those laws that just looks very nice on paper, but nobody's complying. So it is very important to actually have the power and the obligation to apply the instruments that are set on laws or other regulations. So just to give you some examples, well, the example of Costa Rica, the law that we have, we know it's not perfect, but it is the product of more than a year of workshops and meetings and interviews. So when the law came out, it was not the work of a few lawmakers writing a law and just agreeing on it, but it was actually written from the bottom up, which is actually, I think, the key to success in this kind of policy instruments to actually be complied with. So the Integrated Waste Management Law in Costa Rica was approved in 2010, as I mentioned before. It was a product of more than a year of meetings and workshops and negotiating with the several stakeholders. And that law is coherent with the National Waste Management Policy, and that policy is reviewed every so many years. The law stays fixed, but the policy might change from time to time. And then there are some other instruments for planning, like the National Development Plan, which has a component that relates to solid waste management, and some other more specific planning, like the municipal plans for solid waste management, the sectoral plans on the specific industrial sectors, like electronics or tires or others, the waste plans that each industry has to generate, to write, to implement, the institutional environmental management programs that by law every single public institution has to have their environmental management program, the national strategy for separation and recovery of waste, and some other plans that will come along the way. But everything actually has to be coherent with the law that was approved in 2010. And of course, there are some decrees that I will show you guys later on specific products and specific parts of the law. This law, the object of the law is to regulate the integrated waste management and the efficient use of resources through the planning of and execution of regulatory, operational, financial, administrative, educational, monitoring and evaluation of actions. The general principles, which, as I mentioned, and I stress on that because I think it is important that it was agreed with many stakeholders. You know, the shared responsibility, the extended producer responsibility, and that point actually was quite difficult to negotiate because, of course, the industry was afraid that if they were going to be responsible for every single product, that they might not be ready. So let's say the country compromised that this principle will apply to special waste types of waste, and each product before coming to be in place, it has to be negotiated with the specific sector. So it doesn't apply for everything, for every single product, until it's negotiated how it's going to be implemented. But it was actually specified that it's not just the producer, of course not, the importer, because that was one thing that some guys were, you know, playing dumb with it and saying that I'm not the producer, I'm just the importer. So it's specifying the law, producer or importer. The internalization of costs, the responsibility to assume those costs, the prevention at the source, some other principles that you know, precautory, access to information, the duty to inform, and citizen participation. Another thing that was clarified in the law, and that was actually a big complaint from the private sector, is that there were many ministries issuing laws or decrees, or, you know, on, well, the ministries don't issue law, but decrees on different type of waste and different type of permits, and it was so confusing. You know, you have to go to the Ministry of Health for some permits, and then go to the Ministry of Environment for another ones. So it was set up that the Ministry of Health is the governing body in matters of integrated waste management, with powers of direction, monitoring, evaluation, and control. So we have just one ministry in charge of issuing decrees that has to do with waste management. And of course, this Ministry of Health has a consultative platform where the other ministries that had some relation with waste management and in the past had done some had issued decrees or whatever, they are on that consultative platform, so they have to coordinate, for example, the Ministry of Environment and Agriculture and Livestock and some others. And the good thing about the Ministry of Health, which was one of the reasons why they are the ones in charge of waste, is that they have offices in every single canton. You know, Costa Rica is divided in provinces, and each province is divided in cantons. And in each canton, they have offices. And the Ministry of Environment doesn't have that. So they have that on their favor. So they have an office in each canton, so they can coordinate with each municipality at each canton, because they are actually physically there. And so they coordinate at the local level with the municipalities. So in the case of the municipalities, the responsibilities are set up on this Article 8, where, of course, they have the responsibility to apply a municipal plan for integrated waste management. They are the ones in charge to dictate the regulations at the local level. They have to have an environmental management unit which will be responsible for the integrated waste management process. So municipalities didn't have that. They have to guarantee that the waste collection service is provided in their canton. They have to provide the cleaning services for ditches, sewers, roads, public spaces, as well as sanitary management of dead animals on the public roads, which was not defined before, and it was a big mess because nobody was actually responsible for that. They have to prevent and eliminate dump.
Sylvia, can you hear us?
Hello, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got disconnected.
No, no worries.
So I'm still on Article 8. When was the last time you heard me? When I was talking about the responsibilities of the municipalities?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, great. They have the responsibility to promote alternative systems for the selective collection of
We lost you again,
Okay.
Sylvia.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Now we can. And don't worry about it, because when I do the editing of the video, I can just take this part out. So
Okay. So
you can start again at Article 8.
Yeah, I think it's weird when I'm okay. I don't know. You see that the
Yeah, I see your slides.
you see the slides.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So I was saying that the municipalities have to guarantee that the service is self-financing. So they have to charge the rates for waste management services, which might come as a surprise for you guys, but in some countries they don't do that. I mean, they don't collect, not because they can't, but because the municipality decides that it might not be politically reasonable, so they don't do it. They have to do it here by law. They have to coordinate the compliance with the law, with the national law, of course, and they have to promote training and educational awareness and campaigns for the citizens, and establish agreements with micro enterprises, cooperatives, women organizations, and other organizations to participate in the waste management process, particularly in communities that are located in rural areas where the municipalities might not have great access. So these are good opportunities to get to have more micro enterprises, for instance, over there dealing with waste. The municipalities are authorized to develop alternative technologies for the treatment of waste, as long as they are less polluting than the ones that they're doing now. They're basically landfills. And the municipalities are authorized to establish differentiated rates according to the type and amount of waste, which has been done actually now in the commerce and industry sector, because in the industry and commerce sectors, the municipalities they do know the methodology to classify them according to the type of waste and the amount of waste that they generate, so they are able to collect differentiated rates. But that hasn't been the case in the domestic waste. But that's a whole other topic, why we don't have the technology to establish differentiated rates in the domestic sector. Other topics covered by this law are, of course, economic incentives, the importance of having a national information systems, the national education program that has to be set, ways to promote citizen participations. There are some sections on public procurement. So the government sets, the public sector sets the examples for sustainable consumption. The licenses of waste managers, because there are several private waste managers, so they have to be licensed. The obligations of the waste generators, particularly that they have to handle their waste only with the authorized waste managers. The extended producer responsibility to products to be designated by the Ministry of Health. As I told you, that was a big issue in the law here in Costa Rica. So it has to be explicitly said that the products will be designated by the Ministry of Health, and that was basically the only way that the private sector agreed with the law, because if we didn't include that part, they were actually going to boycott the law, the passing of the law at the National Assembly. And the infractions and offenses related to waste management, such as, for instance, illegal dumping of toxic waste, there are all the fines and everything set on the law. And as I mentioned before, there are other norms associated with this law, plenty of that, and that's just an example, and there are many more to come on specific products, on specific disposal methods for final disposals. So these ones are easier to have in place because they don't have to go through the National Assembly. The National Assembly basically had to pass the law, and these other regulations are issued by the Ministry of Health. One important thing, as I mentioned, as I told you guys before, that sometimes we have the laws and in our countries, and it's quite common, that they are not really enforced. So it is really important to have the comptroller's body be very aggressive, let's say so, in the monitoring of the compliance with this type of law. For example, this is a news that was on the newspaper in 2014, where the law was agreed in 2010, and then there were some years that the municipalities have, as a transition period before they had everything in place. But that year, the comptroller's office said, okay, it's enough. If you don't have a waste management plan, we will not approve your budget for the next fiscal year. Because that's one obligation, one of the many obligations that you have by law, and if you are not taking seriously the fact that you need a waste management plan, you will not have a budget at all approved for your municipality. So of course they were running like crazy to have something to show up to the comptroller's body, because of course they needed their budget to work for the next fiscal year. And so that was pretty okay. I mean, we still have some municipalities that they negotiated more time and are doing so. But from 26 out of 81 that had no plan, now we are at about 10 or so. And it's not that they don't have a complete plan, but they haven't agreed on it, or they're working on it. So it's quite important to have a very strict controllers of a body. And another good side effect of having the law in place and having enforced it is the amount of waste management companies that have set up their businesses in Costa Rica, or that have come up. And there's just an example, because there were more than 242 registered waste managers as of June of 2017, which was the last time I checked that page. But one thing is that if there is no, the compliance with the law has driven the growth of this sector of the economy. And of course, if there is no demand and no legal security, then there is no offer. I mean, you as a private investor, you wouldn't set up your business if you weren't sure that there is a demand for your business. And the way to make people actually have to pay, for instance, this Mediclean or these MPD bioinfecciosos, their businesses to get the hazardous waste that comes out of private clinics and private hospitals, and even the small doctor's office. And why are they, the doctors or the dentists, why are they paying for private services? Because the law says it is a hazardous law, the municipality will not collect it, and you have to pay a private waste manager to collect it. So they need this legal security to set up their business, and as I mentioned, it's not a booming, but let's say it's a booming business for electronic waste, hazardous waste, and many other types of waste handling. So that was this is an example of the last audit that the Comptroller's Office did in 2016. They show this map of Costa Rica, where you can see that about 84% of the homes have a waste collection service, and the red areas are the rural areas in Costa Rica, where we have the most difficult access, because sometimes there are no roads or some other problems. So it's less than 50%, but still the Comptroller's Office are being quite stringent, and you have to find a way to provide that service even in remote areas. And other findings that they wrote on their audit, as I mentioned, 14 municipalities still don't have their waste management plan approved. There are some municipalities that have not updated the rate for the waste collection service for more than a year, and the National Comptroller's Office is very strict. You have to update it year by year, because you have to make sure that it's a self-sufficient service on the financially. The average default, people that are not paying for services is about 40% in the municipalities, and they are issuing orders. You have to find a way to collect the money. Some municipalities 30% of the budget deficit because they are not collecting all of the fees, so they are being not punished, but they have to write improvement plans. How are they going to deal with that finding? Some of the plans that they revised didn't have any targets for selective, accessible, or periodic, or efficient collections. Some municipalities have indicated to the Comptroller's Office that they don't have all the users identified. So of course that's a problem when it comes to collecting, because there are some houses that might not be, that maybe they're not being charged because they were not even identified, so they have to upgrade that. The collection routes might not be very efficient, so they have to improve that, as well as some of the truck fleet, they have to improve them, among others. So there are some of the findings that the Comptroller's Office have found on their audit, and I think it's quite important, because when it comes to enforcing, it's not that the municipalities don't want to, but sometimes, these political discussions, because every single finding of this, to improve it or to fix it, you either have to allocate more resources or be more strict with your citizens. And some of those things, people don't want to do it because of many political reasons. So now at least they can blame the National Comptroller's Office, because we have to do it because it's an order by the Comptroller's Office. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, for the very detailed analysis of the Costa Rican example. I have a few questions for you, but I'll save them for after Gerardo's presentation. So Gerardo, if you would like to show your slides now.
Sure, thank you. Please let me know if you can see it.
Not yet. It's loading.
Seems like our connections are slow this morning.
So it says that you're trying to share, but I don't see your presentation.
It's
It's behind your Skype screen, perhaps.
there you go.
Yep. Awesome.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to share some ideas on policy and regulatory frameworks in the waste management sphere. So I'll try to keep the presentation within the 20 minutes. I want to start sharing, well, some information about CCAP, the Center for Clean Air Policy. My name is Gerardo Canales. I'm Director for Latin American Programs, and I'm based in Santiago de Chile. CCAP's main office is in Washington, D.C., and we also have representation in Europe for our work. So basically, CCAP it's a think tank. We do a lot of work in the climate change area, of course. We have been working both at national and city level. So at national level, promoting policies on waste, energy, and transport mainly, and working at the city level, looking at waste issues mainly. So we basically engage with the public authorities and also support the connection with the private sector in order to promote the implementation of climate-friendly action. Just a quick slide on the importance of the waste sector in the emissions and the GHG emissions globally. I think I just wanted to check this slide because whenever we approach the issue of waste management, at least from our perspective, our focus is on emissions, and that's something that it's not always in the minds of the authorities and not at national level or city level. So it's important to highlight that this is the perspective from where we look at the issue when we try to promote action. Of course, we look for programs that can provide co-benefits and different positive outcomes for the countries and from the cities. But our main goal is to reduce emissions, so we should always keep that in mind. So first of all, to look at a little bit of what are the main emissions related to the waste sector. So we know we have several stages, several processes involved in waste management, and all those different steps or different actions, activities that need to take place in order to have proper waste management. They all need financing. They all need this economic sustainability, and of course, in order to get that to get to that point, they also need a proper policy framework that can provide for that. So when we look at policy options, basically we are looking at the local conditions. Every country, every city is different. So when we start analyzing what kind of policy options we can implement or we can design, we need to look at different dimensions: resource availability, the economics, the environmental concerns, the environmental priorities, what are other important policy priorities for the country. For example, right now there are a lot of efforts trying to connect the Sustainable Development Goals with all the climate change policies that are also being implemented, and I think that's a great synergy that we need to promote even further. So governments at every level, they have different options for policy. We have price mechanisms, we have public awareness programs, incentives, some regulations that are becoming more popular, like extended producer responsibility, for example, that is been proven to be very effective in some countries. So there is a whole range of options that authorities can look at. Some examples, I mean, when we talk about a waste management policy, there are different elements that can be part of it. We can have several objectives under the waste policy. For example, here, minimization of waste or waste generation. That should be an important focus and always should be part of our policies. Sometimes we have health concerns that are also very strongly connected to waste management. For example, when we think about waste burning, for example, that can be very critical in some cities. So different policy priorities can be reflected in the particular policies that different countries develop. Once we have an idea of where we want to go, what are the main priorities, and basically we have, I think a good idea of what success would look like in the future for waste management, we need to look at the barriers. I mean, what are the barriers that stand between our goal and where we are now? So when we do that, we normally look at technical aspects, policy and regulation, and the economics, of course. I think those three elements need to be looked at in a combined way in order to be sure that we are looking at all barriers, and that once the program once the policy is installed, we didn't forget about anything and the policy really works. So the regulatory policy and regulatory analysis basically, of course, starts with looking at what's the baseline, what's the current regulation, what are the main policies that exist in the country, and then we look at ways to overcome those barriers. So, for example, in this table, we can see a list of regulatory barriers and some solutions that can be recommended for different kind of barriers. For example, if we have a lack of capacity in the government to regulate and monitor implementation of alternative technologies and processes, well, sometimes there is a need to create a different institutionality that perhaps is not non-existent. I think it's very common to see, particularly in Latin America, that's the reality that we are more close to, that sometimes the local authorities, sometimes they are not, they don't have enough incentives to collaborate with neighbor cities, and sometimes a more regional approach would make sense. But it's just the way the regulation it's in place that each particular municipality, despite of their size or their geographic condition, they have all the authority to do waste management by themselves, and they are not forced to be coordinated with their neighbors. And sometimes, of course, people that are been working in waste management for a long time, we understand that looking at like a wider territory or a group of cities would make more sense from a technical, economic, and financial point of view. So these are the kinds of barriers that we need to look at and of course think about solutions. We have different kind of policies that we can implement, for example, from regulation to force every landfill, for example, to do gas capture. This is something that it seems very obvious, particularly for the people that work in climate change, but it doesn't exist everywhere. I mean, in Chile, in fact, there is no regulation that forces every disposal site to capture gas. So that's an example of some very basic regulation that should be in place when we talk about these issues. There are some distributive public policies, for example, financial incentives, when we want a particular technology or a particular waste management practice to be promoted. Probably we will need to provide some help to the private sector in order to be interested in doing investments. So financial incentives are always part of the equation. We have also some policies that can be redistributive in a sense that The focus is to support a particular group of the society, normally like lower income families or lower income groups. They need special policies, a special treatment in order to promote policies and also to promote equality. And related to what we were just discussing, constituent policies, like for example, waste management coordinated by regional authorities instead of local or city level authorities. Of course, this will depend on the size of cities and particular conditions, but in some places it makes a lot of sense to put the responsibility for waste management on a higher authority. Also important to keep in mind that when we design public policy, we need to check that some criteria is being complied. For example, the execution capacity. I mean, do we really have in the national or local government the capacity, the human resources, or the financial resources to make a certain policy happen? I think we have to keep it very real and be very transparent in understanding what are the real capacities for implementation. Of course, we can set up like a long-term plan, and we can, of course, include within the activities the strengthening of the capacities. But a good start is to acknowledge that we have a gap there or we have a problem. Stability, of course, particularly for everyone, not only for the private sector, but also for the public entities. It's important that the policy is stable and it's a long-term policy, that there is some certainty that it's not going to be changed in the short term. Adaptability, the policy needs to be somehow flexible and be able to adapt to different conditions and different contexts. Coherence and coordination. I mean, for example, for the waste sector, it's very clear that there is a connection with health policies. So we need to be aware of that and be sure that the policy doesn't create any conflicts with other existing policy bodies. And transparency, of course, citizen participation. It's very key. It's very important. Particularly for waste management, when we look at, particularly when we look at like new technologies or new waste management schemes, always we find out that the participation from citizens it's very important. So if they are involved from the beginning, it's more likely that they will engage properly in the implementation phase. This slide is meant to show just an example from Sweden in terms of how they implemented different policies and different regulations at different times, and how that set of policy reforms really changed the way the waste was managed. So we can see a timeline from 1992 to 2015. Where we can see when different policies were implemented and what was the impact. So, for example, we can see here that, of course, waste going into landfill, it's going down because there was a landfill ban and a landfill tax, and finally there was a landfill ban on organic waste. So no organic waste can go into a landfill anymore. And their recycling also went up, and biological treatment also it's growing because of this set of policies. Another example from Peru, we had the opportunity to support Peru in the development of their waste NAMA, and within the NAMA we included several policy recommendations, like for example guidelines for municipalities to set up specific quantitative goals. Also requesting municipalities to monitor and report GHG emissions associated with the waste sector, which is something very important and basic in order to keep track of the advancements. creation of a certification program for high quality compost, for example. If we're thinking about composting or anaerobic digestion projects, we will have production of compost, and if we want the economics to work out, probably we will want some reasonable price for selling the compost or for the commercialization of compost. So in order to do that, or in order to facilitate that process, of course, the existence of standards or regulations around that contribute with a lot of certainty. So it's very important to take that into account. For example, requirement of landfill gas collection for all new landfills, that's something that it wasn't in the Peruvian regulation before, and because of this policy development process, now it's going to be included within their national policy. So, and when we talk about financing, it's very important and very well connected with policy, because we set up the policy, we set up the rules according to where we want to go. What are our goals? But then also we need to be sure that that set of policies facilitates the implementation of new projects. And then we need to look at, okay, what kind of technologies probably we'll want to see develop at municipal level or national level, and what are the economics around those technologies. So this slide is just to show you just like a general set of different technologies and that can be evaluated when we are looking at a more specific program to promote sustainable waste management. And then based on those technologies, we need to do this economic and financial analysis for the options that were selected or for the technologies that have been prioritized. So basically, just run like a regular economic and financial analysis on the different technologies, and it's important to be very. This analysis needs to be done according to the local conditions. That's very important, but sometimes it's not considered completely. For example, in Latin America, it's because some technologies are not here yet. There is no experience, there is no track record, there are not local costs available, for example. So we can have a situation where we know that an anaerobic digestion plant could cost, I don't know, $18 million in Europe or in North America. But if we want to implement the same technology in our countries, perhaps the cost will be half or even less than that. According to what some analysis that we have done, and we have collected some specific data from local providers and from projects that have been developed locally, we have seen that. So it's very important to customize the analysis according to the local conditions. As I said, it seems pretty obvious, but it's important to always keep in mind. So we know that we will have certain that there is a service fee that will be one of the main revenues of the project, but we need to look at what is involved in that fee and make sure that we are covering all the different steps and stages. An important source of revenue is, of course, the tipping fee, and the way this tipping fee is collected, or this waste fee is collected, it's very important. Again, an example in Chile, for example, the estimations say that only 30% of the population pays their waste fee, because there are the exemptions and because there are people that simply don't pay. So in some countries, for example, the waste fee is collected through the electricity bill, which I think it's a very straightforward, simple, and effective way to collect those fees. So why I'm talking about this, because when we do the economic analysis, we not we don't have to look only at the tipping fee, at the existing tipping fee, but we also need to understand how much is really collected at the end. Because if we just multiply the tipping fee by the number of households, we will have a number, but in reality, what we are going to be collecting is much less. So we need to be very transparent and clear on what we are evaluating. We also have other revenues to take into consideration: compost sales, electricity sales, fuel sales, heat sales, recycling, certified emission certificates of emission reduction, for example. And when we look at each of these potential revenue streams, we also need to do an analysis for each of them in terms of, okay, is there a regulation in place? Is there a market price that is clear? Are like waste projects, for example, are subject to receive specific subsidies, for example, because is it considered clean energy? Is it considered clean energy in every case, or incineration perhaps is not in some cases? So we need to look at these potential revenues, but also we need to again do this like reality check and look at, okay, the regulation, the market conditions, and what's really happening in the country. From that analysis, we can maybe extract other potential policy recommendations that we would like to do. For example, we already talk about compost, but for example, heat. In Chile, we're in the last corner in South America, so we have a cold weather, and selling heat for district heating, for example, it's an option. It could be something that makes a lot of sense, but we don't have a regulation in place. So maybe that's a barrier that we would also would want to look at. So again, well, we do this economic analysis. We put all the information we have according to the country, and we run a sensitivity analysis just to understand what are the key parameters, the key parameters that need to be supported for these projects to become feasible. And of course, we need to do then this financial analysis of barriers. What are the main financial barriers that we can find? Again, we have the goal in mind. We have the barrier analysis done. We have chosen some technologies. We have done the analysis, the economic analysis of those technologies, so we know what could be their financial performance according to the existing conditions, and then we can understand what are the additional supports that we would need. So very common to the technologies that we are looking at, for example, there is a lack of familiarity with the technology. So when you go to a bank and you say, okay, I would like to build an anaerobic digestion plant, the bank, probably the agent, he will very likely not be very well aware of what this technology implies, and maybe there is a lot of, they perceive a high technological risk, so the interest rate can go up, or simply you cannot get the loan. So a performance guarantee, for example, it's an financial instrument that could be put in place to provide more confidence to the banking sector, and to really give access for financing to the project developers that are looking at that particular technologies. And we have, in complementation to that, for example, if we see that there is a lack of capacity in local banks, a lack of understanding, okay, then we need to work that out, and we need to probably put in place some capacity building programs to improve the understanding of the banking sector about these technologies, and not only the technologies, but the business models around it, and just to give them more confidence that the projects will work out well. So here, I'm not gonna go one by one, but there is a list of financial barriers, and normally we can easily relate one barrier to a particular financial instrument. So I think there's been a lot of development on this area in these years. So I think you can find examples from different parts of the world that can be useful for your particular case. There are several overarching principles to consider when designing financial mechanisms. So when we look at the barriers and we understand what financial mechanisms, what financial instruments we need to put in place, we need to think about some criteria, sustainability, of course, in a long time. Leverage, it's very important. We want to develop or put in place financial mechanisms that are really efficient and effective, and leverage of additional funding, it's very important. So we really need to be sure that the funding that we're putting on a particular instruments will end up facilitating a much higher investment overall. Private sector acceptance, I think this is a very key criteria that we need to look at. There are several examples of financial instruments that have been put in place and then nobody has used them. and I can think of a couple of 2 or 3 examples in Chile, in fact, of, I don't know, guarantees, for example, that have been designed, put out in the market, and then nobody used them because they don't really provide the appropriate conditions, or they don't really overcome the barriers for the project developers. So we need to be in touch with the private sector from the beginning, because they will very likely be part of the solution, part of the implementation. So that communication, in order to understand what are the real needs and what are the kind of instruments that would be more useful to them, I think it's very important, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are going to use them. Affordability, of course, we have to be very transparent and clear in understanding or in projecting the financial needs of the program, of the instruments, and we have to be sure that we can afford that effort for the whole duration of the program. Well, I'm gonna speed up a little bit more, but just to show you, probably you are aware of this, but what are the main financial sources? So we have public sources, we have private sources. Development banks are very active in the waste management area, at least in Latin America, what we have seen. Now there is a strong willingness to promote public-private partnerships, which I think can provide very interesting schemes for implementation of projects. In terms of when we talk about waste management investments, we are talking about very high or very financially intensive investments. And we have different actors that can provide this, that are used to provide infrastructure investments. So we have commercial banks, capital markets, very active today also. Equity funds are also a very interesting financial instrument that it's been proven to be successful in many places. We have, of course, development finance institutions, bilateral agencies, and multilateral development banks out there. So in terms of accessing financing, I think we have plenty of options. And maybe the barrier is not there, but it's in the preparation of good projects, the preparation of good programs, the construction of strong pipelines of projects, etc. We put in place the right regulatory conditions, the right policies. I think financing is available in general for good projects. So the problem is how to get there with this healthy portfolio. Finally, well, this is just an example of a financial mechanism that we designed for the Colombia Waste NAMA, and it's just an example to show the different actors around a financial instrument. So we have funding coming from the Colombian government, from the international community. We have development banks, national development banks and international development banks also involved in this scheme, and of course commercial banks, national banking, that it's also important to be part of this whole scheme. So my last slide is just to highlight, I think, the main idea of all this process. If we want to implement successful waste management programs in our countries, we need to look, of course, we need to look at policy and regulatory aspects. That dimension is very, very important because we need to have these enabled conditions in place for the projects to happen. We need to look at the financial mechanisms, of course, very carefully, in complementation with the policy and regulatory framework, of course. But the financial mechanism, definition of the financial mechanisms is also very important because, as I said before, there are plenty of options and schemes and alternatives. But for a particular country, probably there will be one set of appropriate financial instruments that will be more successful. So a very important aspect to look at also. And finally, the project pipeline. So we need to try to identify from the beginning what kind of projects we want to be implemented, what scale, what are the financial needs, etc. So I think all these three aspects need to be looked at during the whole policy development process. So it's not just looking at one leg of the stool, but looking at the three at the same time. So I think that's the final idea, final thought, and I'm open to discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerardo and Sylvia, both of you, I mean, for highlighting general principles that we should take into account and consideration while setting up regulations for solid waste management in municipalities, especially in developing countries. The floor is open for questions. Please, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. Yes. If nobody does, then my first question is to Sylvia. Sylvia, firstly, congratulations that Costa Rica has already part of the law, the waste fee structure. So the fees is already accounted for. I just had a question. So do you also take into account differentiated rates for people depending on the amount of waste that they generate and produce? Or is it a standard fee across the municipality?
Each municipality, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Each municipality has the right to define their own rates. So you don't have a single rate for the whole country. You know, it might be different what I pay living in San Jose than when somebody pays living in the next canton, which might be just a few miles away. So what the law says that they have to take into account all the costs that they have, the municipality. So of course that's why it varies from municipality to municipality. They have to take into account all the costs plus the projects and the cost not only for recovery, but actually also, you know, like training and awareness and everything that is related to integrated waste management. And then they are free to define their own schemes. So basically, most municipalities, they charge the commerce and industry according to the amount of waste that they collect from them. And what they do is they do studies to characterize, to categorize the commerce and industries in their canton, you know, like the small shop, big shop, beauty parlor, as many types as they want. So you might find that one municipality has 20 types of businesses types, but maybe the municipality right next only has 10 types. Why? Because they decided to do so. They are free to have as many types as they want. And then they basically distribute the cost among them. And in the case of the domestic ones, that's the one that I've been that I told you that there's a flat rate. Basically, in most of the municipalities that I have seen over here, it is a flat rate to the housing. The only one that I saw that had a different scheme was one that had set one rate for domestic waste, and in case the person is very poor, they can go to the social workers at the municipality, so they study their cases, and they get charged half the rate in case they are approved by the social workers that they live under poverty line. But all the other municipalities, they only have one rate for the housing. And the thing is that we are not, because of some legal things, you cannot charge electricity waste on the electricity bill or things like that, as Gerardo was saying. You cannot do that. You can only charge the waste by itself. And even though the law says that you could, in the case of the domestic waste, charge proportionally to the amount of waste, we don't have the technology to do so. We don't have the trucks. If you try to sell, I don't know, like in some parts of Europe where you sell bags and you can charge in the, you know, as per the amount of bags that they dispose, they will just counterfeit the bags and they will have a big problem. And so we've been studying ways to be able to charge on the domestic, but you know, in a proportionate way to the amount of waste. But we haven't come up with a system that cannot be violated, let's say so, and that is right, because not. Before they were charging, some municipalities were charging, let's say, for the size of the house, but the law says that you pay for the amount, and maybe a person has a huge house, but that doesn't mean that they produce a lot of waste. So that was not legally approved. So yeah, it's a big thing that we have to work on the domestic side. Yeah.
Thanks. That's really good to know, because I was just asking because of the example of say India, because you know you have huge inequalities and you have people producing different amounts of waste and things, and so I like the fact that there is an example in Costa Rica where there's a municipality which you can go to a social service and say, okay, you're producing much less, and then get half the fee waived. That's cool. Thank you so much. Anybody else has questions for either of them? Well, so if there aren't any questions, I would like to take the opportunity to thank both Gerardo and Sylvia for leading this discussion. And I think the discussion is only getting started. And so if you want to reach out to them later on, I will be distributing the presentation and also provide a link to the recording. And hope you join us for the next webinars that we will be holding in the next few weeks. Until then, have a really nice day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sylvia. Thanks, Gerardo.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.